The Blackbird Engines. Forward. This is a story about fire. Not the fire of destruction. Though there is that, but the fire of creation, of ambition, of quiet brilliance forged in furnaces no one saw. It is the story of a group of engineers, scientists, and visionaries who built machines no one believed possible. They worked in shadows. They failed in silence. And yet they changed the world. What follows is a fictionalized history, a tapestry woven from the threads of real Cold War programs, forgotten aircraft, classified alloys, and whispered names. Some of it happened. Some of it nearly did. All of it speaks to a time when innovation moved faster than sound, and the sky was not the limit. It was the beginning. This is the story of Meridian, of Tom Brennan, of the engines that flew higher than history. This is the story of the Blackbird Engines. The morning fog rolled across the Allegheny Valley like a gray curtain being drawn back to reveal the stage of American industry. From his office window on the third floor of the Meridian Aerospace Manufacturing Company, Tom Brennan watched the sun pierce through the Pennsylvania mist, illuminating the sprawling complex of buildings that had become his life's work. The year was 1952, and America was flexing its industrial muscles in ways the world had never seen. Tom adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and took a long sip of black coffee from his ceramic mug emblazoned with the company logo, a stylized eagle soaring above a gear. At 43, he had the weathered hands of a man who had built things, who understood the marriage of metal and precision that made modern miracles possible. His brown hair, now touched with premature silver at the temples, spoke to the long nights spent hunched over blueprints and prototypes. The Meridian plant stretched across 47 acres of Pennsylvania farmland that had been transformed into something approaching a cathedral of American engineering. 6 main production buildings, each the size of an airplane hangar, hummed with the constant rhythm of precision manufacturing. Smaller auxiliary buildings housed research and development labs, administrative offices, and the machine shops where the most delicate work was performed by craftsmen whose skills had been honed through generations of Pennsylvania steelwork. Tom had founded Meridian in 1947, using his savings from his service as an Army Air Forces engineering officer, and a modest loan secured against his father's dairy farm. The post-war boom in aviation had created opportunities for small, specialized manufacturers who could deliver what the big corporations couldn't: speed, flexibility, and above all, discretion. In 5 short years, Meridian had grown from a dozen employees working in a converted barn to over 300 skilled workers producing some of the most advanced aircraft engine components in the world. But this morning was different. This morning, everything was about to change. Tom's secretary, Margaret O'Sullivan, knocked twice on his door before entering, their established protocol for matters of utmost sensitivity. Margaret was a woman of 45 with sharp green eyes and prematurely gray hair that she wore in a practical bun. She had served as a code breaker for the Women's Army Corps during the war, and Tom had recruited her not just for her administrative skills, but for her ability to keep secrets and spot patterns that others missed. "Mr. Brennan, your 9 o'clock appointment is here," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of her Irish accent. She had emigrated to Pennsylvania as a child, but the music of County Cork still colored her words when she was nervous or excited. Tom nodded and straightened his tie. He knew who his 9 o'clock appointment was, though the name on his calendar simply read, Mr. Phillips, Government Procurement. In reality, his visitor was CIA Deputy Director for Plans Frank Wisner, one of the most powerful men in America's rapidly expanding intelligence apparatus. The man who entered Tom's office looked every inch the Washington bureaucrat: gray suit, conservative tie, briefcase that had seen better days. But his eyes were sharp and calculating, and Tom noticed the way he automatically checked the room's sight lines and exits. This was a man accustomed to danger, even in the mundane setting of a Pennsylvania factory office. "Mr. Brennan," Wisner said, extending his hand, "thank you for agreeing to see me on such short notice." "Mr. Phillips," Tom replied, playing along with the cover identity. "Coffee? I'm afraid it's just standard office brew, but it's hot and strong." "That sounds perfect." Wisner settled into the chair across from Tom's desk, and Margaret quietly closed the door behind her as she left. Both men waited until they heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway. "Your facility is impressive," Wisner began, gazing out the window at the bustling factory floor below. Our technical people have been very pleased with the turbine components you've delivered for the C-119 program. Tom nodded. The C-119 flying boxcar transport aircraft had been one of Meridian's first major military contracts, and their specialized high-temperature turbine blades had earned praise from Air Force engineers. But he sensed this meeting was about something far more significant than transport aircraft. "We try to do good work," Tom said simply. Wisner opened his briefcase and withdrew a manila folder marked with classification stamps that Tom couldn't quite read from across the desk. "Mr. Brennan, what I'm about to discuss with you must remain absolutely confidential. The national security implications are substantial." "I understand. Do you know much about the current situation in Korea?" Tom nodded grimly. The Korean War had been raging for 2 years now, and while the newspapers spoke of American technological superiority, those in the defense industry knew the uncomfortable truth. The Soviet Union had surprised everyone with the advanced capabilities of their MiG-15 fighter aircraft. American pilots flying F-86 Sabres found themselves in aerial combat with aircraft that were, in many respects, their equals or even superiors. The intelligence we're gathering suggests that Soviet aviation technology has advanced more rapidly than our analysts predicted, Wisner continued. "We need to know more about their capabilities, their production methods, their research and development programs. Traditional intelligence gathering methods have their limitations when dealing with highly classified technical information." Tom leaned back in his chair. "What does this have to do with Meridian?" Wisner slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a sleek, needle-nosed aircraft unlike anything Tom had ever seen. The design was revolutionary, long and slender, with razor-sharp wings that seemed to cut through the air, even while the aircraft sat motionless on the ground. "This is a reconnaissance aircraft that our technical people have been developing," Wisner explained. "It's designed to fly higher and faster than any aircraft in existence. High enough and fast enough that Soviet air defenses can't touch it." Tom studied the photograph with growing fascination. The aircraft's lines spoke to an entirely new approach to aerodynamics, one that would require revolutionary advances in engine technology. "The challenges are significant," Wisner continued. "The aircraft needs to operate at altitudes exceeding 80,000 feet, at speeds approaching twice the speed of sound. The engine requirements are unlike anything that's ever been built." Now Tom understood why he was here. Meridian had built a reputation for solving impossible engineering problems, for taking theoretical concepts and turning them into reliable, manufacturable reality. The major aerospace corporations like Lockheed and Boeing had the resources for large-scale production, but they often lacked the flexibility and innovation needed for truly revolutionary projects. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" Tom asked. 18 months for initial prototypes. The full production run would depend on testing results, but we're looking at approximately 50 aircraft over 3 years. Tom whistled softly. In the aviation industry, 18 months was barely enough time to design a conventional engine, let alone something capable of the performance Wisner was describing. "The technical specifications are extraordinary," Wisner continued, sliding another document across the desk. "Maximum altitude capability of 90,000 feet. Sustained cruise speed of Mach 2.2, range of over 4,000 miles, and absolute reliability. These aircraft will be operating over hostile territory with no possibility of assistance if something goes wrong." Tom scanned the specifications, his engineer's mind already grappling with the challenges. The extreme altitude requirements would demand entirely new approaches to air intake design and fuel combustion. The high-speed cruise capability would require materials that could withstand temperatures and stresses far beyond anything in current production. And the reliability requirements meant that every component would need to be manufactured to tolerances that pushed the boundaries of what was mechanically possible. "I assume we're not the only company you're talking to about this," Tom said. Wisner shook his head. "Pratt & Whitney has the primary contract for engine development, but they've run into some problems with their high-altitude performance characteristics. Our technical people believe that your company's expertise in exotic materials and precision manufacturing could provide solutions they haven't been able to achieve." Tom set down the specifications and looked directly at Wisner. What exactly are you asking Meridian to do? We want you to develop and produce a specialized component system for the reconnaissance aircraft's engines. Specifically, the high-temperature section components, turbine blades, combustion chamber linings, and exhaust nozzle assemblies. These components will need to operate reliably at temperatures exceeding 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, while maintaining precise aerodynamic characteristics. The challenge was staggering. Tom had worked on high-temperature components for jet engines before, but nothing approaching these specifications. The materials science alone would require breakthrough innovations in metallurgy and precision casting techniques. What's the budget? Tom asked. $12 million for development and initial production runs, with performance bonuses that could bring the total to $15 million. Tom nearly choked on his coffee. $12 million was more than Meridian's total revenues for the past 3 years combined. It was the kind of contract that could transform the company from a small specialty manufacturer into a major player in the aerospace industry. But it was also the kind of contract that could destroy them if they failed to deliver. I'll need to see more detailed technical specifications, Tom said carefully. And I'll need to know exactly what kind of security requirements we're looking at. Wisner nodded and reached into his briefcase again. The security requirements are comprehensive. This project will require a completely separate facility, isolated from your regular production operations. All personnel will need extensive background checks and security clearances. All technical documentation will be classified at the highest levels. He handed Tom a thick folder. These are the preliminary security protocols. I should warn you, Mr. Brennan. Once you sign on to this project, every aspect of your company's operations will be subject to government oversight. Your facility will be monitored, your employees investigated, your communications potentially intercepted. This is not a decision to make lightly. Tom hefted the folder, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. Inside were the blueprints for a future that could make Meridian Aerospace one of the most important companies in America, or destroy everything he had built. How long do I have to decide? 72 hours, Wisner replied. If you decline, we'll need to move quickly to alternative options. Time is not a luxury we have in this endeavor. After Wisner left, Tom sat alone in his office, staring out at the factory floor where his employees were hard at work on conventional contracts. Aircraft parts for commercial airlines, components for military transport aircraft, and specialized machinery for other manufacturers. It was honest work, profitable work, work that had built Meridian into a respected company in the Pennsylvania Industrial Corridor. But it wasn't the kind of work that changed the world. Tom had always dreamed of building something that mattered, something that would push the boundaries of what was technically possible. His service in the Army Air Forces had shown him glimpses of what American engineering could achieve when necessity and innovation converged. The wartime development of radar, jet engines, and advanced aircraft had proved that American industry could accomplish miracles when properly motivated and funded. The reconnaissance aircraft project represented exactly the kind of challenge that had drawn him to engineering in the first place. It was a chance to work at the absolute cutting edge of technology, to solve problems that no one had ever solved before, to create something that would help secure America's place in an increasingly dangerous world. But the risks were enormous. The security requirements alone would fundamentally change the nature of Meridian as a company. The technical challenges might prove insurmountable, leaving the company bankrupt and Tom's reputation in ruins. And there were moral questions too. Tom had seen enough of war to know that the aircraft they would be helping to create would be used for purposes that weren't always clearly justified. That evening, Tom drove home through the winding roads of Westmoreland County to the modest 2-story house where he lived with his wife Ellen and their 2 children. The house sat on 5 acres of rolling hills that had once been part of his father's dairy farm, with views across the valley that had inspired some of the happiest moments of his life. Ellen was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he arrived, and the smell of pot roast and vegetables filled the house with warmth and comfort. At 39, Ellen retained the beauty that had captivated Tom when they met at a church social in 1935, but now it was tempered with the wisdom and strength that came from being the wife of an ambitious engineer during some of America's most challenging years. "You're late again," she said without looking up from the stove, though her tone carried affection rather than reproach. Important meeting today, Tom replied, hanging his coat on the hook by the door. Government contract. Ellen turned to look at him, recognizing something in his voice. Big one. Could be. Their son Michael, now 14, burst into the kitchen with the boundless energy that characterized teenage boys. He had Tom's brown hair and Ellen's green eyes, and had inherited his father's fascination with mechanical things. The boy could take apart and reassemble almost any device in the house, and had built an impressive collection of model airplanes that hung from his bedroom ceiling. "Dad, did you see the news about the new Air Force jet?" Michael asked excitedly. "The F-86D Sabre Dog? It can fly over 600 miles per hour." Tom smiled at his son's enthusiasm. "Pretty impressive machine. Think Meridian will ever build engines for fighters like that?" "Who knows?" Tom replied. "Maybe someday." Their daughter Sarah, 12 and possessed of her mother's practical nature, looked up from her homework at the kitchen table. "Are you going to work even more hours than you already do?" she asked with the directness that children used when they sense changes coming. Tom sat down beside her and looked at her math homework, algebra problems that would have challenged him at twice her age. "I don't know yet, sweetheart." "Why?" "Because you already miss half my softball games and most of Michael's scout meetings. If you work more, we'll never see you." Ellen caught Tom's eye across the kitchen. They had discussed this many times. The balance between professional ambition and family life, between building a successful company and being present for the people who mattered most. Tom's long hours and frequent travel had already strained that balance, and both of them knew that a major government contract would make the situation worse. After dinner, Tom and Ellen sat on the front porch while the children finished their homework inside. The June evening was warm and comfortable, with fireflies beginning to appear in the gathering dusk. The sounds of rural Pennsylvania surrounded them, distant lowing of cattle, the evening songs of birds, the whisper of wind through the maple trees that lined their property. "Tell me about the contract," Ellen said quietly. Tom hesitated, then remembered that Ellen had held a security clearance during the war, and understood the importance of discretion. "It's classified work. Aircraft engines for a reconnaissance program. Very advanced, very challenging." "Dangerous?" "The work itself, no. But it would change everything about the company. More security, more oversight, more pressure. And if we succeed, it could make Meridian one of the most important aerospace companies in the country." Ellen was quiet for a long moment, watching the fireflies dance across their property. "And if you fail? We could lose everything. What does your heart tell you?" Tom looked at his wife, this woman who had supported his dreams even when they seemed impossible, who had sacrificed her own career as a schoolteacher to help him build Meridian, who had never complained about the long hours and uncertain income that came with entrepreneurship. "My heart tells me this is what I've been working toward my whole career," he said honestly. "A chance to build something that really matters, something that could help keep America safe in a dangerous world." Ellen reached over and took his hand. "Then I think you already know what you're going to do." The next morning, Tom called a meeting with his senior staff. In addition to Margaret O'Sullivan, the group included Chief Engineer Robert Bob Kowalski, Production Manager James Jim Martinez and Quality Control Director Dorothy Det Henderson. Bob Kowalski was a broad-shouldered man of Polish descent whose family had worked in the Pennsylvania steel mills for 3 generations. At 35, he had already established himself as one of the most innovative engine designers on the East Coast, with a particular genius for solving problems that had stumped engineers at much larger companies. His thick black hair was perpetually disheveled from running his hands through it while working on difficult technical problems, and his workbench was legendary for its organized chaos. Jim Martinez had joined Meridian 2 years earlier after serving as a production supervisor at Boeing's Seattle plant. The son of Mexican immigrants, he had worked his way up through the aerospace industry on the strength of his ability to translate engineering concepts into practical manufacturing processes. At 41, he had the steady demeanor and attention to detail that made complex production schedules look effortless. Dot Henderson was one of the few women in senior management positions in the Pennsylvania aerospace industry. At 38, she had a master's degree in metallurgy from Carnegie Tech, and had worked for Westinghouse before joining Meridian. Her expertise in materials science and quality control had been crucial to the company's success, and her insistence on rigorous testing procedures had saved them from several potentially catastrophic failures. Tom gathered them in the conference room adjacent to his office, a spartanly furnished space with a large table, blackboards on 2 walls, and windows overlooking the main production floor. He had worked with these people for years, trusted them with the most sensitive aspects of Meridian's operations, and knew that their input would be crucial to whatever decision he made about the reconnaissance aircraft project. "I've been approached about a government contract," Tom began without preamble. "It's classified work, which means I can't give you all the details until you've been cleared. But I can tell you that it involves developing engine components for an advanced reconnaissance aircraft. The technical requirements are unlike anything we've worked on before." Bob leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm of an engineer presented with an interesting problem. "How advanced are we talking?" "Sustained flight at altitudes above 80,000 feet. Cruise speeds exceeding Mach 2. Operating temperatures over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit." That whistled softly. "That's pushing the boundaries of current materials science. We'd need to develop entirely new alloys, new manufacturing processes." "The timeline?" Jim asked. 18 months for initial prototypes." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 18 months was an impossibly short timeline for developing the kind of revolutionary technology Tom was describing. It would require working around the clock, hiring additional staff, and probably establishing entirely new production facilities. "What's the contract value?" Margaret asked. $12 to $15 million. Bob sat back in his chair, stunned. "That's more than 3 times our current annual revenue." "It would also require extensive security protocols," Tom continued. "Background investigations for all personnel, classified facilities, government oversight of all operations. And if we fail to deliver, it could bankrupt the company." Jim was already making notes on a pad of paper. "We'd need to hire at least 50 additional engineers and technicians. Maybe more. And we'd need specialized equipment that could cost millions." "The question," Tom said, looking around the table at these people who had helped him build Meridian from nothing, "is whether we think we can actually do this. Whether we can develop technology that's never existed before, on a timeline that seems impossible, while maintaining the kind of security that the government requires." That spoke first. The materials challenges are significant, but not necessarily insurmountable. There's been some interesting research at Carnegie Tech and MIT on high-temperature alloys. If we could recruit some of the graduate students working on those projects. "Production-wise, it's feasible," Jim added. "We'd need to build a separate facility, probably off-site, with specialized tooling. But the basic manufacturing processes exist. We'd just be pushing them to extremes they've never reached before." Bob was sketching something on his notepad, his mind already grappling with the engineering challenges. "The real question is whether we can solve the fundamental problems. High-altitude air intake design, combustion stability at extreme temperatures, materials that can withstand thermal cycling. These aren't just incremental improvements. We're talking about breakthrough innovations." Margaret had been taking notes throughout the discussion. "From an administrative standpoint, the security requirements will be manageable but complex. We'll need to establish entirely separate accounting systems, personnel files, communication protocols. It's doable, but it will require careful planning." Tom looked around the table at these people he had come to think of as family. "I need to know, are you willing to take this risk with me? Because if we do this, it will change all of our lives. The pressure will be enormous, the hours will be brutal, and the chances of failure are significant." Bob was the first to respond. "Tom, I became an engineer because I wanted to build things that had never been built before. This is the kind of project I've dreamed about my whole career." That nodded her agreement. "The technical challenges are exactly what make it worth doing. If it were easy, they wouldn't need us." Jim looked thoughtful. "My main concern is personnel. We'll need to find people who can not only do the technical work, but also handle the security requirements and pressure. Not everyone is cut out for classified work." "I think we can find the right people," Margaret said. Pennsylvania has a lot of talented engineers who worked on classified projects during the war. Many of them are working for larger corporations now, but might be interested in the opportunity to do more innovative work. Tom felt a surge of pride in these people who had chosen to follow his vision. Then we're agreed? We're going to take on this project. The unanimous yes around the table sealed Meridian's fate. Within 72 hours, Tom would sign the contracts that would transform his small Pennsylvania aerospace company into a key player in America's most secret reconnaissance programs. But none of them could have predicted the extraordinary challenges and dangers that lay ahead. Chapter 2 The Recruitment. 6 weeks after signing the contract with the CIA, Tom stood in the ruins of what had once been the Heinz potato processing plant on the outskirts of New Kensington, Pennsylvania. The facility had been closed since 1949, another casualty of the post-war economic adjustments that had left parts of industrial Pennsylvania dotted with abandoned factories and empty lots. But Tom saw something different in the sprawling complex of brick buildings. He saw the future home of what would officially be called the Meridian Advanced Materials Research Division, though the employees would come to know it simply as the Skunk Works, a nickname borrowed from Lockheed's own secret aircraft development program. The main building was a massive structure, nearly the size of 2 football fields, with high ceilings and thick brick walls that would provide both the space needed for large-scale manufacturing and the security required for classified operations. Smaller buildings would house research labs, administrative offices, and specialized testing facilities. The entire complex was surrounded by a 12-foot chain-link fence that would soon be topped with razor wire and monitored by armed guards. Bob Kowalski kicked at a pile of debris and looked up at the soaring ceiling of the main building. It's going to take a hell of a lot of work to turn this place into a precision manufacturing facility. Good bones, though, replied Jim Martinez, who was already taking measurements and making notes about the electrical and mechanical systems that would need to be installed. The floor is solid concrete, the structural steel is in good condition, and we've got rail access for bringing in heavy equipment. That Henderson was examining the smaller buildings with the critical eye of someone who understood the environmental requirements for advanced materials research. We'll need to install clean rooms for the precision casting work. And we'll need specialized ventilation systems for handling toxic chemicals and high-temperature processes. Tom nodded, his mind already visualizing the transformation that lay ahead. The Government Liaison Office estimates it will take 4 months to complete the security modifications and basic renovations. We need to be producing prototype components within 6 months. Margaret O'Sullivan looked up from the clipboard where she was tracking the endless list of tasks required to establish a classified facility. We've received approval to begin recruiting personnel. The security clearance process is already underway for our priority candidates. The recruitment process had proven to be one of the most challenging aspects of the project. Finding engineers and technicians who had both the technical skills required for advanced aerospace work and the personal backgrounds that would allow them to receive top-secret security clearances was like searching for needles in a haystack. The government's background investigators were thorough to the point of paranoia, delving into every aspect of candidates' personal lives, political beliefs, and social associations. Tom had quickly learned that some of the most talented engineers in the country were unsuitable for classified work, not because of any disloyalty to America, but because of associations or activities that made government security officials nervous. A brilliant metallurgist from Carnegie Tech had been rejected because his brother-in-law was a member of the Communist Party. An experienced production manager from Westinghouse had been turned down because he had attended peace rallies during the 1930s. But they had also found remarkable talent willing to join their cause. Dr. Catherine Kate Sullivan had been the first major recruit, a young woman who had completed her doctorate in aeronautical engineering at MIT and had worked on classified jet engine projects during the war. At 29, she was one of the few female engineers in the country with experience in high-temperature materials research, and her work on turbine blade cooling systems had been recognized as groundbreaking by her peers. Kate had initially been reluctant to leave her position at Pratt & Whitney, where she was working on advanced jet engine designs for the Air Force. but the opportunity to lead her own research team and work on technology that pushed the absolute boundaries of what was possible had ultimately convinced her to join Meridian. The turbine blade problem is the most challenging aspect of the entire project, she had explained to Tom during her interview. We need materials that can maintain their structural integrity at temperatures that would melt conventional steel, while also maintaining precise aerodynamic shapes under enormous centrifugal forces. It's going to require entirely new approaches to metallurgy and precision casting. Dr. Heinrich Henry Zimmermann had been the second major recruit, a German-born physicist who had immigrated to the United States in 1938 and had worked on radar development at Bell Labs during the war. His expertise in high-frequency electronics and electromagnetic theory would be crucial for developing the sophisticated control systems needed for the reconnaissance aircraft's engines. Henry was a quiet, methodical man who approached technical problems with the systematic precision that characterized the best German engineering. At 45, he had the kind of deep theoretical knowledge that could bridge the gap between pure science and practical application. His slight accent and formal manner of speaking occasionally made other employees uncomfortable, but his technical brilliance was undeniable. The control systems for these engines will be unlike anything currently in production, he had told Tom. We are not simply scaling up existing technology. We are entering entirely new regimes of operation where conventional approaches may not work at all. The third key recruit had been Captain Samuel Sam Washington, a recently retired Air Force pilot who had flown both P-51 Mustangs during World War II and F-86 Sabres during the Korean War. At 32, Sam had logged over 2,000 hours of combat flying time and had survived being shot down twice. His practical understanding of how aircraft and engines performed under extreme conditions would be invaluable for ensuring that their theoretical designs would actually work in the real world. Sam was a tall, lean black man whose calm competence and dry sense of humor had quickly made him popular with the other team members. His presence at Meridian was also quietly revolutionary. While the military was beginning to integrate, most American aerospace companies remained overwhelmingly white. Tom's decision to recruit Sam had raised eyebrows among some of the company's traditional customers, but his qualifications were so impressive that objections had been muted. I've flown planes that were built by the lowest bidder and maintained by 19-year-old mechanics under combat conditions, Sam had said during his interview. I know the difference between designs that work and designs that get people killed. If we're building engines for reconnaissance aircraft that will be operating over hostile territory, they better be absolutely reliable. The recruitment process had also brought in dozens of other talented individuals, research chemists, precision machinists, electronics technicians, and skilled craftsmen whose combined expertise would be needed to turn theoretical concepts into manufactured reality. Many of them had worked on classified projects during the war and understood the unique demands of secret research and development. But finding the right people was only the first challenge. Training them to work together as a cohesive team, while also maintaining the security protocols required for classified work, was proving to be equally difficult. The security requirements were unlike anything Tom had experienced in the civilian aerospace industry. Every employee with access to classified information had to be cleared through extensive background investigations that could take months to complete. All technical documents had to be stored in specially constructed safes and could only be accessed by authorized personnel. Telephone conversations about the project were prohibited, and all written communications had to be approved by security officers. The physical security measures were equally comprehensive. The renovated facility would be surrounded by multiple layers of fencing and monitored by armed guards 24 hours a day. Entry would be controlled through a single checkpoint where all personnel would be required to show identification and submit to searches. Camera systems would monitor all work areas, and specialized equipment would detect any attempts to photograph or copy classified documents. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of the security requirements was the need for compartmentalization. Different teams would work on different aspects of the project without necessarily knowing how their work fit into the larger picture. Engineers developing turbine blades wouldn't necessarily know the performance specifications of the aircraft they were designed for. Technicians manufacturing combustion chamber components wouldn't know the operational altitude requirements that drove their design. This compartmentalization was intended to minimize the damage if security was compromised, but it also made technical coordination much more difficult. Tom found himself serving as one of the few people who understood how all the different pieces fit together, and the pressure of maintaining that overview, while also managing the day-to-day operations of the project, was enormous. 3 months after signing the contract, Tom convened the first all-hands meeting of the Meridian Advanced Materials Research Division in the partially renovated main building of the former potato processing plant. Nearly 80 people had assembled: engineers, technicians, machinists, security personnel, and administrative staff who would form the core team for what would be called Project Blackbird. The name had been chosen by the CIA project managers to reflect both the reconnaissance mission of the aircraft and its sleek, dark appearance. Tom thought it was appropriately evocative. Blackbirds were known for their intelligence, their ability to fly at high altitudes, and their distinctive calls that could be heard from great distances. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tom began, standing on a makeshift platform at the front of the cavernous space. "You are here because you represent the best talent in American aerospace engineering. Each of you has been selected not only for your technical expertise, but also for your ability to work on projects of the highest national importance." He paused, looking out at the faces of these people who had left secure positions at established companies to join his ambitious venture. Some were young recent graduates eager to work on cutting-edge technology. Others were experienced professionals who had been drawn by the opportunity to work on projects that would push the boundaries of what was technically possible. "The project we are undertaking is classified at the highest levels of government," Tom continued. "I cannot tell you all the details about the aircraft you will be helping to create, but I can tell you that it will be capable of performance that has never been achieved before. It will fly higher and faster than any aircraft in history, and it will help America maintain the intelligence-gathering capabilities we need to protect our national security." Kate Sullivan stood near the front of the group, her red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes bright with excitement. She had spent the past month developing preliminary designs for the turbine blade assemblies, and the technical challenges were unlike anything she had encountered in her career. "The engine components we will be developing must operate reliably under conditions that push the absolute limits of materials science," she had told her research team. "We're not just improving existing technology, we're inventing entirely new approaches to high-temperature engineering." Henry Zimmerman had assembled a team of electronics specialists who were working on the sophisticated control systems that would be needed to manage the engines under extreme operating conditions. The reconnaissance aircraft would need to operate at altitudes where the air was too thin for conventional engine control systems, and at speeds where split-second adjustments would be the difference between success and catastrophic failure. "We are developing systems that must function flawlessly in environments where no similar systems have ever been tested," Henry had explained to his team. "Failure is not an acceptable option when the aircraft is operating thousands of miles from any possible assistance." Sam Washington was working with both the engineering teams and the CIA liaison officers to ensure that the engine designs would meet the operational requirements of pilots who would actually fly the reconnaissance missions. His experience in combat had taught him that even the most sophisticated technical systems were useless if they couldn't be operated reliably under the stress and confusion of real-world missions. "These engines will be powering aircraft that will fly over the Soviet Union, China, and other hostile territories," he had told the assembled teams. "The pilots will be operating alone, at altitudes where a mechanical failure means certain death. Every component we build has to be absolutely reliable." As Tom concluded his remarks and the meeting broke up into smaller working groups, he felt both exhilaration and trepidation about what lay ahead. They had assembled an extraordinary team of talented individuals, but the technical challenges they faced were unprecedented. They would need to invent new materials, develop new manufacturing processes, and create engines that could operate reliably under conditions that no engines had ever faced before. And they would need to do it all within a timeline that seemed impossible, while maintaining security protocols that made normal engineering collaboration extremely difficult. But as he watched his teams dive into their work with enthusiasm and determination, Tom felt confident that they could succeed. These were the same kinds of people who had built the radar systems that won the Battle of Britain, who had developed the jet engines that revolutionized aviation, who had created the industrial capacity that made American victory in World War II possible. If anyone could build engines for aircraft that would fly higher and faster than anything in history, it was this group of engineers and technicians working in a renovated potato processing plant in Pennsylvania. Chapter 3. Breakthrough and Setback. The breakthrough came at 2:30 a.m. on a cold February morning in 1953, in the materials testing laboratory that had been constructed in what was once the potato sorting room of the old Heinz plant. Dr. Kate Sullivan had been working for 14 straight hours, running high-temperature tests on a new titanium alloy that her team had developed using manufacturing techniques borrowed from both the jewelry industry and medieval blacksmithing. The test specimen, a turbine blade prototype no larger than a man's thumb, had been subjected to temperatures exceeding 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit while being spun at rotational speeds that generated centrifugal forces equivalent to 40,000 times the force of gravity. It was an environment more extreme than anything found on Earth except in the hearts of volcanoes or the exhaust streams of rocket engines. And the blade was holding together. Kate stared at the monitoring equipment in disbelief, then ran the numbers again to make sure she wasn't hallucinating from exhaustion. The blade's structural integrity remained at 98.7% after 6 hours of continuous testing under conditions that should have destroyed any known material within minutes. "My God," she whispered to the empty laboratory, her voice barely audible over the whine of the test equipment. "It's actually working." The alloy that had achieved this breakthrough was designated MA7, the seventh iteration in a series of experimental materials that Kate's team had been developing over the past 8 months. It combined titanium as the base metal with carefully controlled additions of aluminum, vanadium, and trace amounts of rare earth elements that had never been used in aerospace applications before. But the real innovation wasn't in the alloy composition. It was in the manufacturing process. Kate had convinced Tom to hire master craftsman Giuseppe Joe Torino, a 70-year-old Italian immigrant who had spent his career creating precision jewelry and decorative metalwork. Joe's understanding of how metals behaved under extreme heat and pressure, combined with techniques he had learned from his grandfather in the old country, had provided insights that university-trained metallurgists had missed. "It's not just what metals you use," Joe had explained in his heavily accented English, his gnarled hands demonstrating forging techniques on a piece of scrap metal. "Is how you convince the metals to work together. Must treat them like musicians in orchestra. Each one has different personality, different strengths. Must find the harmony." The manufacturing process Joe had developed involved heating the raw materials in a specially constructed furnace that used precisely controlled atmospheres of inert gases, then shaping the components using hand tools that he had crafted himself. The process was more art than science, requiring an intuitive understanding of how the metal felt at different temperatures and stages of working. Kate grabbed the telephone and dialed Tom's home number, knowing that he had left strict instructions to be called immediately if there were any significant developments, regardless of the hour. "Tom, it's Kate. You need to get down here right away. We've got a blade that's been running at full test parameters for 6 hours with no degradation." Tom arrived at the facility 45 minutes later, his hair disheveled and his coat thrown over pajamas. The February night was bitter cold, and his breath formed clouds in the air as he hurried from his car to the security checkpoint. Even at nearly 3 a.m., the facility maintained full security protocols. Guards checked his identification and searched his briefcase before allowing him to enter the classified areas. He found Kate in the testing laboratory, surrounded by monitoring equipment and data sheets covered with her precise handwriting. Her eyes were bright with excitement despite the obvious exhaustion, and she had the slightly manic energy that came from witnessing something extraordinary. "Show me," Tom said simply. Kate led him to the test apparatus, a complex arrangement of high-temperature furnaces, precision spindles, and monitoring equipment that had cost nearly $200,000 to construct. At the heart of the system was the turbine blade prototype, glowing cherry red from the extreme heat while spinning at speeds that made it appear as nothing more than a blur. Test conditions are 2,150 degrees Fahrenheit, rotational speed of 28,000 RPM, which generates centrifugal forces of approximately 40,000 G, Kate reported, reading from her instruments. The blade has been operating under these conditions for 7 hours and 12 minutes. Structural integrity remains at 98.5%. Tom studied the monitoring displays, his engineer's mind grappling with the implications of what he was seeing. They had been trying for months to develop materials that could survive even half these conditions for more than a few minutes. This single successful test represented a breakthrough that could make the entire Blackbird project feasible. "What's different about this alloy?" he asked. "It's the Ma7 composition, but manufactured using Joe Torino's process," Kate explained. The key insight was his understanding of grain structure control during the forging process. He's able to create crystalline structures in the metal that are incredibly resistant to high-temperature failure. Tom nodded slowly. "Can we reproduce this consistently? And can we scale up the process for production quantities?" Kate's expression became more cautious. "That's the big question. Joe's process is highly dependent on his personal skills and experience. He can feel subtle changes in the metal that our instruments can't detect. We're going to need to figure out how to translate his intuitive understanding into reproducible manufacturing procedures." The next morning, Tom called an emergency meeting of the senior project staff. In addition to Kate, the group included Bob Kowalski, Henry Zimmerman, Sam Washington, Jim Martinez, Henderson, and CIA Liaison Officer Colonel James Jim Harper, who had been assigned to provide ongoing government oversight of the project. Colonel Harper was a lean, intense man in his early 40s who had served as an intelligence officer during World War II, and understood both the technical and security requirements of classified aerospace projects. He had initially been skeptical of Meridian's ability to deliver the revolutionary technology required for the Blackbird engines, but the previous night's test results had clearly impressed him. "Gentlemen and ladies," Tom began, "Dr. Sullivan's team has achieved a breakthrough that changes everything about this project. We now have a material that can survive the operating conditions required for the Blackbird engines." He gestured to Kate, who had prepared a technical presentation using charts and graphs that showed the test results in detail. The performance data was stunning. The Ma7 alloy showed thermal and mechanical properties that exceeded the project requirements by significant margins. "The implications are enormous," Kate explained. "If we can scale this technology to production quantities, we can build engines that will not only meet the Blackbird specifications but exceed them. We're talking about aircraft that could potentially operate at altitudes approaching 100,000 feet and speeds exceeding Mach 2.5. Bob Kowalski leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. "What are the manufacturing requirements?" "That's where it gets complicated," Kate replied. "The process requires master-level metalworking skills that are extremely rare. Joe Torino is probably one of only a dozen people in the country who has the necessary experience." Colonel Harper frowned. "We can't base a critical defense program on the skills of a single craftsman. What if something happens to him? What if he retires or becomes unable to work?" Jim Martinez nodded his agreement. "From a production standpoint, we need processes that can be documented, standardized, and taught to other workers. Otherwise, we're building a program on quicksand." Henry Zimmerman had been quietly studying Kate's technical data. "Perhaps we can develop instrumentation that can detect the subtle changes that Mr. Torino perceives through experience. If we can quantify what he is feeling, we can potentially teach others to achieve similar results." Sam Washington raised a different concern. "Even if we can solve the manufacturing problems, how long will it take to produce enough components for a full fleet of aircraft? The CIA wants 50 aircraft, which means hundreds of engine components, each requiring this specialized manufacturing process." Tom felt the familiar weight of leadership as he considered the challenges his team was raising. The breakthrough was extraordinary, but it also highlighted how much work remained to be done. They had solved the fundamental materials problem, but now they needed to solve the equally difficult problems of manufacturing, quality control, and production scaling. "Dr. Sullivan, I want you to work with Mr. Torino to develop a training program for additional craftsmen," Tom decided. "We'll need at least a dozen people who can perform this manufacturing process at his level of skill." Colonel Harper, We'll need additional funding for expanded manufacturing facilities and specialized equipment. The current budget assumptions won't be sufficient for the kind of precision manufacturing we're going to require. Mr. Martinez, start developing production schedules based on different assumptions about manufacturing capacity. I want to know how long it will take to produce components for 10 aircraft, 25 aircraft, and 50 aircraft under various scenarios. As the meeting broke up, Tom felt both exhilaration and trepidation about what lay ahead. They had achieved a breakthrough that many experts had believed was impossible, but success had also revealed the magnitude of the challenges that remained. The next 18 months would test every aspect of Meridian's capabilities as a company. But first, they needed to survive a crisis that none of them saw coming. The crisis began 3 weeks later with a seemingly routine visit from State Department security investigators. 2 men in dark suits arrived at the facility on a gray March morning, presenting credentials that identified them as specialists in industrial security compliance. They requested meetings with several employees, including Henry Zimmerman and 2 of the electronics technicians who had worked on classified radar projects during the war. Tom initially assumed this was a standard security review of the type that periodically occurred at all classified facilities. But Margaret O'Sullivan, whose wartime experience with intelligence operations had given her a keen sense for unusual situations, noticed that the investigators were asking questions that went far beyond routine security procedures. They're not just reviewing security clearances, she told Tom privately after the investigators had left. They're investigating specific individuals for possible security violations. And they're asking about political associations and beliefs in ways that suggest they suspect subversive activities. Tom felt a chill of apprehension. The political climate in America had grown increasingly paranoid about communist infiltration since the beginning of the Korean War. Senator Joseph McCarthy's investigations had created an atmosphere where anyone with past associations with left-wing organizations or foreign-born relatives could find themselves under suspicion. Henry Zimmerman, despite his valuable contributions to American defense programs and his obvious loyalty to his adopted country, was particularly vulnerable because of his German birth and his continued correspondence with former colleagues in Europe. The electronics technicians had attended union meetings during the 1930s that were now considered potentially subversive. 2 days later, Colonel Harper arrived at the facility with news that confirmed Tom's worst fears. The State Department has raised questions about the security clearances of 3 project personnel, he announced grimly. Pending the outcome of enhanced background investigations, they're being suspended from all classified work. Tom felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Henry Zimmerman was irreplaceable. His expertise in high-frequency electronics was crucial to the engine control systems. The 2 electronics technicians were skilled specialists whose work on precision instrumentation was vital to the manufacturing process. How long will these investigations take? Tom asked. Potentially months, Harper replied. The investigators are being extremely thorough because of the sensitivity of the project. Colonel, we can't complete this project without these people. Dr. Zimmerman alone has knowledge that would take years for someone else to acquire. Harper's expression was sympathetic but firm. I understand the technical implications, Tom. But security requirements are non-negotiable. If there's any possibility that classified information could be compromised, we have to err on the side of caution. The suspension of key personnel created a crisis that threatened the entire project timeline. Henry's work on engine control systems came to a complete halt, with no one else on the team having sufficient expertise to continue his research. The electronics technician's suspension disrupted the precision manufacturing work that was crucial to producing the specialized components required for the MA7 alloy process. Kate Sullivan found herself trying to compensate for the loss of expertise by working even longer hours and taking on responsibilities far beyond her original role. The stress was beginning to show in her work, and Tom worried that they were pushing their remaining team members beyond their limits. We need to find replacements, Bob Kowalski said during a crisis meeting of the senior staff. There have to be other electronics experts who can get security clearances. It's not that simple, Jim Martinez replied. The combination of technical expertise and security clearance eligibility is extremely rare. Most of the people with Henry's level of knowledge have associations or backgrounds that make them security risks under current standards. That Henderson raised another concern. Even if we find suitable replacements, it will take months to bring them up to speed on the work that's already been done. We'll lose at least 6 months of progress. Tom stared out the window at the Pennsylvania winter landscape, feeling the weight of responsibility for the project and for the livelihoods of the 80 people who had joined Meridian to work on it. The breakthrough with the Ma7 alloy had seemed to guarantee success, but the security crisis threatened to destroy everything they had accomplished. What if we compartmentalize the work even further? He asked. Could we structure Henry's electronics work so that someone with a lower security clearance could handle some of the basic research? Colonel Harper shook his head. The control systems are too integral to the overall aircraft performance. Anyone working on them would need to understand the operational requirements, which means full access to classified specifications. As winter turned to spring, the project struggled forward with a reduced team and increasing pressure from Washington. CIA officials were growing impatient with the delays, and there were rumors that the agency was considering transferring the engine development work to larger corporations that might be less vulnerable to security problems. But salvation came from an unexpected source. Joe Torino, the elderly craftsman whose techniques had made the Ma7 breakthrough possible, approached Tom with a proposal that would transform both the project and Meridian's future. "Mr. Tom," Joe said in his heavily accented English, "I have idea. My grandson, he is graduate from Carnegie Tech with degree in electrical engineering. Very smart boy, very loyal American. Maybe he can help with the electronics work." Tom's first instinct was skepticism. They needed world-class expertise, not a recent graduate with no experience in classified work. But desperation made him willing to consider any possibility. "Tell me about your grandson, Joe." Anthony Torino, 24 years old. Graduate with highest honors from Carnegie Tech, work for 2 years at Westinghouse on radar systems. Clean background, no political associations, good Catholic boy. Joe reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph showing a young man in graduation cap and gown, with the kind of intense, intelligent eyes that Tom had learned to recognize in exceptional engineers. "He is very interested in electronics theory, very good with mathematics. And he learned from me about working with metals, understand how materials behave under stress. Maybe this combination of knowledge is useful." Tom studied the photograph, considering the possibilities. A young engineer with electronics training and practical metalworking experience might indeed be valuable, especially if he could obtain security clearance quickly. Would he be interested in joining the project? Joe smiled. He is very interested in working on advanced technology, and he trusts his grandfather's judgment about good opportunities. Within 2 weeks, Tony Torino had passed his initial security screening and reported for work at the Meridian facility. At 24, he had the energy and enthusiasm of youth combined with a solid grounding in electrical engineering theory and an intuitive understanding of materials science learned from his grandfather. More importantly, he brought a fresh perspective to problems that had stymied more experienced engineers. While Henry Zimmerman had approached control systems from the standpoint of theoretical electronics, Tony combined his grandfather's craftsman sensibilities with modern engineering knowledge to develop solutions that were both elegant and practical. "The problem with these control systems is that we're trying to make them too complex," Tony explained to Tom during his first week on the project. "My grandfather taught me that the best solutions are usually the simplest ones. Instead of trying to monitor every possible variable, why don't we focus on the critical parameters and design systems that can adapt automatically to changing conditions?" It was exactly the kind of insight that Meridian needed. By the summer of 1953, Tony had not only filled the gap left by Henry Zimmerman's suspension, but had actually improved upon the original control system designs. His work was elegant, reliable, and manufacturable using conventional production techniques. The security crisis had ultimately strengthened the project by forcing the team to develop more robust and flexible approaches to their technical challenges. But it had also taught Tom valuable lessons about the vulnerabilities inherent in classified work during an era of political paranoia. As 1953 drew to a close, Meridian had overcome both the materials science challenges and the security setbacks that had threatened the project. The Ma7 alloy was being manufactured in increasing quantities, the control systems were functioning flawlessly in testing, and the first complete engine assemblies were nearing completion. But Tom had no way of knowing that their greatest crisis still lay ahead, and that it would come not from technical challenges or security investigations, but from the devastating fire that would ultimately consume not just buildings and equipment, but the very evidence of what they had accomplished. Chapter 4, The Secret Flight. By the autumn of 1954, the Meridian facility had been transformed into one of the most advanced aerospace manufacturing centers in the world. The once empty buildings now hummed with the constant activity of precision manufacturing, with specialized equipment that had been custom-built for processes that existed nowhere else on Earth. The main production floor housed 12 manufacturing stations where master craftsmen worked alongside precision machinery to create engine components, using Joe Torino's revolutionary techniques. Each station was staffed by specialists who had undergone months of training to achieve the skill levels required for the Ma7 alloy process. In the testing laboratories, Kate Sullivan's team conducted round-the-clock evaluations of completed components, subjecting each piece to conditions more extreme than anything it would encounter in actual service. The testing protocols were exhaustive: temperature cycling, vibration testing, chemical exposure, and stress analysis that pushed materials to their absolute limits. The electronics workshop where Tony Torino had continued and expanded upon his grandfather's innovations was filled with prototype control systems that represented breakthrough advances in aerospace electronics. The young engineer had developed flight control computers that were smaller, more reliable, and more sophisticated than anything in military service. But the true measure of Meridian's success would not come from laboratory tests or manufacturing achievements. It would come from the performance of their engines in the aircraft they had been designed to power. Tom received the call on a crisp October morning from Colonel Harper, whose voice carried an excitement that the normally reserved military officer rarely displayed. "Tom, we're ready for the first integrated test flight. The aircraft is fueled and ready at Edwards Air Force Base. Your engines are about to make history." Edwards Air Force Base in California's Mojave Desert had been chosen as the test site for the reconnaissance aircraft because of its isolation, perfect flying weather, and extensive experience with experimental aircraft programs. The base had been home to Chuck Yeager's sound barrier-breaking flights, and its dry lake beds provided emergency landing areas for aircraft pushing the boundaries of performance. Tom flew to California accompanied by Kate Sullivan, Tony Torino, and Sam Washington, who would serve as technical observers during the test flights. The CIA had arranged for them to witness the flights from a secure observation area, where they could monitor the performance of their engines without compromising the aircraft's classified design details. The aircraft that awaited them at Edwards was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. Long and sleek, with razor-sharp wings and a needle-nosed fuselage, it looked more like a guided missile than a conventional airplane. Its dark blue paint scheme gave it an otherworldly appearance, as if it had been designed by beings from a more advanced civilization. "Beautiful," Sam Washington murmured, his pilot's eye appreciating the aircraft's elegant lines. "Looks like it's moving fast even sitting still." The test pilot was Tony Levier, a legendary aviator who had flown first flights for more experimental aircraft than anyone in history. At 42, he had the calm confidence and precise technical knowledge that made him the ideal choice for testing aircraft that pushed into unknown performance regimes. "Your engines have been performing flawlessly in ground tests," Levier told the Meridian team during the pre-flight briefing. "Today we're going to see how they behave at altitude and speed." The first test flight was scheduled to be relatively conservative: climb to 65,000 feet, and cruise at Mach 1.8 for 30 minutes before returning to Edwards. It was well within the theoretical performance envelope of both the aircraft and the Meridian engines, but it was still far beyond what any operational military aircraft could achieve. Tom watched from the observation bunker, as Levier taxied the aircraft to the end of Edwards' longest runway. Even at idle power, the Meridian engines produced a distinctive sound, a low, powerful roar that spoke of enormous energy barely contained within precision-manufactured components. "Edwards Tower, Archangel 1 ready for takeoff," Levier radioed, using the aircraft's code name. Archangel 1, cleared for takeoff. Winds calm, visibility unlimited. The aircraft began its takeoff roll with smooth, almost effortless acceleration. Tom watched the speed indicators on the monitoring equipment as the aircraft reached rotation speed and lifted off with the fluid grace of a natural flyer. Within minutes, it had disappeared into the crystalline blue sky of the high desert. Climbing through 45,000 feet, engines performing nominally. Levier's voice crackled over the radio. Temperature and pressure readings all in the green. Kate Sullivan monitored the telemetry data streaming from sensors mounted throughout the Meridian engines. Every critical parameter was being measured and transmitted back to Edwards in real time, allowing the engineering team to track the performance of their creation with unprecedented precision. Turbine inlet temperature holding steady at 2050 degrees, she reported. Exactly what we predicted. Control system response is excellent, Tony Torino added, watching displays that showed how the engines were automatically adjusting to changing flight conditions. The fuel flow optimization is working better than we hoped. As the aircraft climbed toward its test altitude, Tom felt a mixture of pride and anxiety that he had never experienced before. Everything his company had worked toward for the past 2 years was being tested in the most demanding environment possible, 65,000 feet above the Mojave Desert, at speeds approaching twice the speed of sound. Level at 65,000 feet, Levier reported. Beginning acceleration to test speed. Through high-powered binoculars, Tom could just make out the aircraft as a tiny speck against the deep blue sky. At that altitude, the aircraft was operating in an environment more like space than the Earth's atmosphere. Air pressure was less than 1% of sea level, and temperatures approached 60 degrees below zero. Passing Mach 1.5, Mach 1.6, Mach 1.7, Levier reported, his voice as calm as if he were describing a Sunday drive. Engines are running like Swiss watches. Mach 1.8 and holding. All systems nominal. This is one sweet-running airplane. For 30 minutes, the aircraft cruised at conditions that no human-made machine had ever sustained before. The Meridian engines operated flawlessly, delivering the precise thrust and control response that the mission required while maintaining perfect reliability in an environment that would destroy conventional engines within minutes. Beginning descent for Edwards, Levier finally reported. Fuel remaining is exactly as calculated. Your engines are more efficient than we dared hope. The landing was as smooth as the flight had been dramatic. Levier touched down on Edwards' main runway with the precision of a master craftsman, and the aircraft rolled to a stop in front of the hangar, where ground crews waited to begin the detailed post-flight inspection that would reveal how the engines had performed under operational conditions. Tom and his team were allowed to examine the engines after they had cooled to safe handling temperatures. What they found exceeded their most optimistic expectations. Despite 30 minutes of operation under conditions more extreme than anything previously achieved, the engines showed virtually no signs of wear or stress. Turbine blades look like they just came out of the factory, Kate observed, using a precision measuring device to check critical dimensions. No distortion, no oxidation, no fatigue cracking. Control system components all show normal readings, Tony added. No anomalies, no unexpected behavior. The engines performed exactly as designed. Sam Washington, who had flown enough aircraft to understand what normal post-flight conditions looked like, was amazed by what he was seeing. I've never seen engines come back from a test flight looking this good. Usually there's some sign of stress, some indication of the punishment they've taken. These look like they could go right back up for another flight. Colonel Harper approached the group with a satisfied expression that Tom had rarely seen on the usually serious military officer's face. Gentleman and lady, I've just received word from Washington. Based on today's test results, the CIA is authorizing full-scale production of the reconnaissance aircraft. Your engines have exceeded every specification and performance requirement. Tom felt a surge of pride and relief that threatened to overwhelm him. 2.5 years of extraordinary effort, technical innovation, and personal sacrifice had culminated in this moment of absolute vindication. The small company he had founded in a Pennsylvania barn had created technology that would help secure America's position in an increasingly dangerous world. But the celebration was tempered by the knowledge that their real work was just beginning. The CIA wanted 50 aircraft, which meant hundreds of engines manufactured to the exacting standards they had achieved for the test program. It meant scaling up Joe Torino's artisan manufacturing processes to industrial production levels while maintaining the precision and quality that made their engines unique. Over the following months, Tom divided his time between the California test program and the Pennsylvania manufacturing operation. Each successful test flight validated their design choices and provided data that helped optimize the engines for operational use. But each flight also revealed new challenges and requirements that pushed their engineering capabilities to new limits. The operational aircraft would need to carry sophisticated surveillance equipment that added weight and changed the aircraft's center of gravity. They would need to operate from remote airfields with limited maintenance facilities. Most importantly, they would need to function reliably on missions that could last over 10 hours and cover distances of up to 4,000 miles. Kate Sullivan led the effort to adapt their engines for these operational requirements, working closely with CIA technical specialists to understand the unique demands of intelligence-gathering missions. The surveillance equipment generated electromagnetic interference that affected engine control systems. The extended flight times required fuel efficiency improvements that pushed the boundaries of combustion technology. The remote airfield operations meant that engines needed to be maintained using equipment and techniques that could be transported anywhere in the world. "We're not just building engines anymore," Kate told Tom during one of their late-night planning sessions. "We're building complete propulsion systems that can support intelligence operations in any environment on Earth." Tony Torino's control systems became increasingly sophisticated as operational requirements evolved. He developed adaptive systems that could compensate for equipment failures, optimize performance for changing mission profiles, and even provide pilots with enhanced capabilities for avoiding enemy detection. "The key insight," Tony explained to a gathering of CIA technical specialists, "is that these aircraft will be operating alone, thousands of miles from any support. The engines need to be not just reliable, but intelligent, able to diagnose problems, adapt to changing conditions, and keep flying even when things go wrong." By the spring of 1955, the first production engines were being delivered to the CIA's aircraft program. Each engine represented thousands of hours of precise manufacturing work, using processes that existed nowhere else in the world. The quality control standards were unprecedented. Every component was individually tested, every engine was run through complete operational cycles before delivery, and detailed documentation tracked every aspect of the manufacturing process. But even as production ramped up and the reconnaissance aircraft began operational missions over the Soviet Union and other targets, Tom was troubled by growing concerns about the security of their operation. The Meridian facility had become one of the most sensitive industrial sites in America, holding secrets that could compromise national security if they fell into enemy hands. The Korean War had ended, but the Cold War was intensifying. Soviet intelligence services were increasingly active in the United States, and there were indications that they were particularly interested in advanced aerospace technology. The FBI had briefed Tom and his senior staff about potential threats, warning them to be vigilant for any signs of attempted infiltration or espionage. The security measures at the Meridian facility had become increasingly elaborate. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter around the clock. All employees were subject to periodic polygraph examinations. Electronic surveillance equipment monitored all communications in and out of the facility. Visitors were restricted to essential personnel only, and even routine maintenance work required extensive security clearances. But perhaps the most troubling aspect of the security situation was the growing awareness that their greatest vulnerability might not come from external threats, but from the sheer volume of classified information they were accumulating. Every technical drawing, every test report, every manufacturing procedure was classified at the highest levels of government. The facility's safes and filing cabinets contained thousands of documents that represented not just Meridian's achievements, but America's most closely guarded aerospace secrets. Tom often lay awake at night wondering what would happen if those secrets were ever compromised. The reconnaissance aircraft program depended on the Soviet Union's inability to detect or intercept the high-altitude flights. If enemy intelligence services gained access to the technical details of the aircraft's capabilities and limitations, the entire program could be rendered useless overnight. Margaret O'Sullivan had developed increasingly sophisticated procedures for managing classified information, but even she acknowledged that the system was becoming unwieldy. "We're generating classified documents faster than we can properly catalog and secure them," she told Tom during one of their weekly security reviews. "The filing systems are overloaded, and some of the older documents are stored in areas that don't meet current security standards." Tom knew that they needed to address these concerns, but the pressure of meeting production schedules and supporting operational missions left little time for administrative improvements. The CIA was demanding increased production rates, and every delay in engine deliveries potentially compromised reconnaissance missions that could provide crucial intelligence about Soviet military capabilities. As 1955 progressed into 1956, the Meridian facility operated at a pace that pushed both equipment and personnel to their limits. The manufacturing floors ran 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. Engineers worked 60-hour weeks as standard practice, with 80-hour weeks common during critical phases of new engine development. The financial rewards were substantial. The CIA contracts had made Meridian one of the most profitable companies in Pennsylvania, and Tom had been able to provide his employees with salaries and benefits that were among the best in the aerospace industry. But the human costs were also significant. Marriages strained under the pressure of long hours and constant security restrictions. Health problems became common as people worked exhausting schedules without adequate rest. Tom himself felt the effects of the relentless pace. At 47, he had developed chronic stomach problems from stress and irregular meals. His hair had turned completely gray, and he had gained 30 pounds from eating too many quick meals at his desk. Ellen worried constantly about his health, but Tom felt that he couldn't reduce his involvement in the project without compromising its success. "You're not going to be any good to the project if you work yourself to death," Ellen told him one evening as he sat at the kitchen table reviewing production schedules, instead of eating the dinner she had prepared. "Just a few more months," Tom replied, a phrase he had been using for over a year. "Once we get the production line fully stabilized, things will calm down." But both of them knew that wasn't true. The reconnaissance aircraft program was expanding, with new variants being developed for different types of missions. The CIA was already talking about follow-on aircraft that would require even more advanced engines. And there were rumors of Soviet technological advances that might require entirely new approaches to reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. As winter approached in 1956, Tom stood once again in his office window, looking out at the sprawling Meridian complex that had grown far beyond his original vision. The facility now employed over 400 people and operated around the clock. The parking lots were filled with cars, the loading docks bustled with activity, and the smokestacks from the specialized furnaces painted columns of vapor against the Pennsylvania sky. It was the embodiment of American industrial achievement, a private company that had risen from humble beginnings to create technology that was helping to secure the nation's defense. The engines they built powered aircraft that flew missions over the most sensitive targets in the world, gathering intelligence that helped American policymakers understand the threats facing the country. But Tom also sensed that they were living on borrowed time. The pace was unsustainable, the security risks were growing, and the technical challenges were becoming increasingly complex. Something would have to change, but he had no way of knowing that the change would come in the form of a catastrophic fire that would destroy not just buildings and equipment, but the very evidence of their extraordinary achievements. Chapter 5. The Fire. The fire began at 11:47 p.m. on February 15, 1957, in the chemical storage area of Building C, where specialized compounds for the Ma-7 alloy process were kept in temperature-controlled environments. The exact cause would never be determined. The security investigation that followed would conclude that it might have been an electrical malfunction, a chemical reaction caused by improper storage, or possibly sabotage by unknown parties. Tom was at home, finally enjoying a quiet evening with Ellen and their children, when the call came from the facility's night security supervisor. "Mr. Brennan, We have a situation here. Building C is on fire, and it's spreading fast. Tom threw on clothes and drove through the winter night toward the orange glow that was already visible from miles away. By the time he arrived at the facility's main gate, 3 volunteer fire departments from surrounding communities had responded to the alarm, but their equipment was designed for house fires and small industrial incidents, not for the kind of chemical-fueled inferno that was consuming one of America's most sensitive military facilities. Margaret O'Sullivan was already at the scene, having been called by the same security supervisor. She stood near the command post that the fire chief had established in the facility's main parking lot, her face illuminated by the flickering light of the flames and her expression grim with the understanding of what they were witnessing. "How bad is it?" Tom asked. "Bad," she replied simply. "Building C is completely engulfed. The fire is spreading to Building B, and there are chemical explosions every few minutes. The fire chief says they can't get close enough to fight it effectively." Tom watched in horrified fascination as explosions lit up the night sky. Each blast represented thousands of dollars worth of specialized chemicals and equipment being destroyed, but more importantly, each explosion was consuming irreplaceable research data and manufacturing knowledge that had taken years to develop. "What about the classified documents?" Tom asked. Margaret's expression grew even more grave. "Most of the technical archives are in Building B. The safes are fire-rated, but if the building collapses or if the fire gets hot enough..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Tom understood the implications. Building B housed the central repository for all of Meridian's classified documents: engineering drawings, test reports, manufacturing procedures, security files, and financial records related to the CIA contracts. If those documents were destroyed or compromised, it would represent a security disaster of unprecedented proportions. Kate Sullivan arrived just as another explosion shook the ground beneath their feet. She had been working late in the materials testing laboratory in Building A when the fire started, and had barely escaped as the conflagration spread between buildings. "The whole chemical storage area went up like a bomb," she reported breathlessly. "I've never seen anything burn that fast or that hot. It's like the fire is feeding on itself." Bob Kowalski and Jim Martinez arrived together, having been called from their homes in nearby communities. Both men stared at the inferno with the stunned expressions of people watching their life's work being consumed before their eyes. "Any word on casualties?" Bob asked. "The night shift was evacuated safely," Margaret reported. 23 employees were in the facility when the fire started. All are accounted for and uninjured. Tom felt a moment of relief. No loss of life was infinitely more important than any material damage, but that relief was quickly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were losing. The fire was now consuming Building B, where the most sensitive classified materials were stored, and was threatening to spread to the main production facility in Building A. "Mr. Brennan." The voice belonged to Colonel Harper, who had driven from his quarters at the nearby military installation as soon as he received word of the emergency. "We need to talk immediately about security implications." Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The fire at Meridian's classified facility burned for nearly 9 hours before it was fully extinguished. By dawn on February 16, 1957, Building C had collapsed entirely, and Building B was a blackened shell. Smoke still rose from twisted girders and shattered brick walls, and the ground was littered with the charred remains of equipment, cables, and half-melted safes. Tom Brennan stood at the edge of the destruction, stood on his coat and despair in his eyes. The smell of scorched chemicals clung to the air like a warning. Around him, security teams and fire inspectors moved with urgency, documenting everything. FBI agents had already begun their preliminary investigation, and the words "possible sabotage" echoed through whispered conversations. Colonel Harper was one of the first to speak clearly and officially. "Mr. Brennan," he said, approaching with a clipboard and a scowl, "Washington is treating this as a major breach. The destruction of classified documents and prototypes may constitute a Category 2 security failure. I've been ordered to initiate full containment procedures." Tom, his voice hoarse from smoke and fatigue, nodded. "How bad is it?" "Early assessment. 70% of our technical archive is gone. Safes in B were not designed for prolonged chemical fires. We have no verified backups for many of the MA7 process documents. Tom's stomach sank. The alloy, the foundation of the Blackbird engine, had always been as much an art as a science. Without precise replication, they might never achieve the same material properties again. Kate Sullivan arrived moments later, her face pale beneath the soot. I checked with our off-site backup partners. Some drafts were sent to the Pittsburgh archives last fall, but most of our key test data never left this site. The alloy processing temperatures, they're gone. Tony Torino, eyes red with fury, added. And the control logic? Everything since version 4.2 was stored in the secure terminal in Building B. We have code snapshots, but the real-time performance logs are gone. Colonel Harper cut in, voice clipped. Washington is dispatching a security review board. You'll all be interviewed. Until further notice, Project Blackbird is suspended. Tom looked at his team, the exhausted faces of Kate, Tony, Bob, that Margaret. These were the people who had built a miracle from scrap and secrets. Now that miracle had gone up in smoke. Then we do what engineers always do, Tom said. We start again. 3 days later, Meridian's conference room was transformed into a war room. Walls were covered in blueprints, half-burnt pages recovered from Building B, and photographs of melted equipment. The team had split into subgroups: reconstruction, security, and continuity. Kate led reconstruction. With only fragments of the MA7 process remaining, she had begun rerunning early experiments to rediscover the forging tolerances. Joe Torino, devastated by the destruction of his handmade tooling, was building a new furnace with help from 2 machinists and his grandson Tony. We know the alloy can be made, Kate reminded her team. We just need to remind ourselves how. Tony and Henry Zimmerman, recently reinstated after his security clearance was reviewed and cleared, began building new versions of the control system from memory. Some of my old notes are intact, Henry said, unrolling a water-stained schematic. Between us, we can recreate the logic cores. What we don't have, we redesign. The security team was led by Margaret and Jim Harper. They reviewed personnel files, interviewed every employee, and coordinated with the FBI. It could have been accidental, Margaret said. But it's also possible this was intentional. Too many coincidences. Their suspicions soon focused on a technician who had called in sick the night of the fire. A former Westinghouse contractor with Soviet relatives, his security file had been flagged months earlier, but never escalated. When the FBI raided his apartment, they found a suitcase packed with unmarked envelopes, transit documents for Canada, and a half-destroyed notebook with partial schematics of the MA7 design. He didn't start the fire, Harper said grimly. But he may have provided the intel for someone else to. Tom listened in silence as this was reported. Then he stood. We're rebuilding the program. And this time we do it better. We digitize. We duplicate. And we build redundancy into every process. He paused, then added, but we do it quietly. If someone's watching, I want them to believe we've been crippled. The team exchanged glances. That was the moment Project Blackbird became something else. Something even more secret, more ambitious. The enemy had tried to erase them. Now they would rise from the ashes. They would fly again. Chapter 7. Rebuilding the Invisible. In the weeks that followed the fire, Meridian's operations became a strange blend of frantic activity and absolute silence. A new temporary facility, nicknamed Echo Site by the engineers, was hastily established in a nearby warehouse complex. Unmarked trucks moved at night. Equipment was delivered under false invoices. Even the address on internal memos was replaced by a code, E47. Tom Brennan knew that this phase was about more than reconstruction. It was rebirth. And to be reborn, they had to make themselves disappear. No external visitors, no contractors, no press. This time, we build the heart of the program behind a deeper veil, he told his senior staff. We make the work untraceable, even to ourselves. To rebuild, they started with memory. Kate Sullivan led the effort to reverse engineer MA7 from the remnants of failed and partial experiments. Without the original casting records, they relied on gut instinct and educated guesswork. For days, her team worked with chalk outlines of old furnace layouts, trying to re-establish Joe Torino's artisan forging process. We don't need to replicate it perfectly, Kate said. We need to make something better. Reimagine the process. Joe, despite his age and grief, had found new life in the challenge. This time, he told Kate, we teach the metal to remember us, not the other way around. Meanwhile, Tony Torino spearheaded the restoration of the control systems. He and Henry Zimmerman created a parallel development process. Tony led the digital redesign of the control units, while Henry worked on physical test rigs using spare military components. The Soviets won't expect what we're building now, Tony told his grandfather one night. They stole a moment in time. We're building the future. On the other side of Echo Site, a new team was assembled, one that reported only to Margaret O'Sullivan and Colonel Harper. Their mission was clandestine, to test Meridian's internal security. We missed the mole, Margaret said. That can't happen again. They simulated phishing attacks using forged memos. They left marked documents in break rooms and watched to see who picked them up. They planted stories to see if rumors spread beyond Echo Site. And slowly, they identified gaps. For employees were removed quietly, no explanation given. One junior engineer simply disappeared after lunch. Another was escorted to the gate with no chance to clean his desk. Morale dipped, but loyalty hardened. Those who remained understood the stakes. Despite the chaos, progress accelerated. By April, a new prototype alloy, Ma8, surpassed the high-temperature tolerance of its predecessor. Kate's voice nearly cracked as she read the data. We're back. And then came the request from Washington. We need an engine flight ready by July, Colonel Harper said, the tone leaving no room for argument. The Soviets are building something. Something fast. We think they're testing high-altitude interceptors near Semipalatinsk. Tom closed the door to his office. Then, looking around at the blueprints taped to his walls, the photographs of the burned buildings, and the handwritten notes in the margins of recovered documents, he said to no one in particular, then we build something faster. Rebuilding wasn't just recovery. It was evolution. Chapter 8. Operation Raven. By mid-May 1957, the name Raven had begun appearing on internal CIA cables, obliquely referenced, redacted, shrouded in the kind of vagueness that signaled high stakes and higher secrecy. Tom Brennan first heard it from Colonel Harper in a midnight call. Tom, Harper said, we have a situation. Washington's authorizing a secondary platform, codenamed Operation Raven. Tom rubbed sleep from his eyes. A follow-up to Blackbird? No, Harper said. A parallel. This one is unmanned. We're entering the drone era. The project was bold. An autonomous high-altitude reconnaissance vehicle with a slimmer profile, no cockpit, and an operating ceiling of 100,000 feet. No pilot meant greater risks could be taken. The vehicle would carry a single, miniaturized engine, based on Meridian's designs, but refined for lighter weight and near-silent operation. The Soviets are building their own interceptors, Harper said. We need eyes where no man can fly, and we need them yesterday. The new craft would be rail-launched, recovered via parachute, and capable of crossing the Ural Mountains without radar detection. The engine had to be half the size of Blackbird's core, and twice as efficient. Kate Sullivan stared at the Raven schematics and muttered, "This thing's a missile with a brain." Tony Torino was more enthusiastic. "This is a code dream. No pilot, no interface lag, full autonomous thrust balancing. We can build something smarter than anything in the sky." To match the urgency, Tom authorized a separate task force, codenamed Horizon, to work on Raven full-time. They operated from an underground machine hall in the hills outside Greensburg, disguised as a mining project. The secrecy protocols were even tighter than Blackbird's. Kate's first challenge was the heat signature. If they can see it, they can shoot it. We need it cold, fast, and silent. She and Joe Torino developed a new alloy coating, MEX, a laminate that dispersed heat along the exterior skin like a chameleon changing color. It wasn't invisible, but it was confusing enough to mislead infrared sensors. Meanwhile, Tony programmed a modular neural unit that could adapt mid-flight to sudden weather shifts, electronic jamming, and target rerouting. "It thinks like a pilot," he told Tom one night. Only it doesn't panic. Testing began in early June, deep in the Nevada desert. The first flight lasted 18 minutes. The second, 37. By the fifth flight, Raven crossed into the upper stratosphere, curved back west, and landed within 3 feet of its calculated recovery point. Harper called it a triumph. The CIA called it a miracle. Tom called it terrifying. If we can do this, he told Ellen one quiet evening, so can they. But what haunted him more than the technology was what Raven represented. Warfare without risk to the warrior, machines making decisions that once belonged to humans. Still, the work continued. By July, Raven was operational. And in Moscow, a man in a dark gray suit reviewed a blurry photograph of the drone's silhouette at 96,000 feet. He made a note in Cyrillic. If this is what the Americans can hide, imagine what they're showing. The race had entered a new phase. And this time, no one was in the cockpit. Chapter 9, The Mole. The first real sign came in August, during a routine audit of classified transmissions. A low-level clerk flagged a discrepancy between engine component batch reports and outgoing encrypted logs. At first, it seemed like a data entry error. But then a second inconsistency appeared, this time in the control system debug files. Minor deviations, nothing that would be noticed unless someone was comparing internal storage logs to what was sent to Washington. Margaret O'Sullivan reviewed the anomalies late one evening with Colonel Harper. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, it was with a heavy certainty. We have a leak. Someone inside Horizon is altering our outgoing data. The problem is, they're doing it too well. Like they know what won't get noticed. Harper grimaced. Which means this isn't amateur work. This is tradecraft. A quiet internal investigation began. Employees were questioned under cover stories. Storage drives were swapped with instrumented decoys. Surveillance teams were embedded in night shifts. They didn't tell Tom at first. Harper insisted it would compromise objectivity. But Margaret disagreed. Tom finally learned the truth during a meeting with Kate, Tony, and Harper. If someone's leaking specs, Kate said, then we have to assume the Russians are getting pieces of MEX, the Raven control core, maybe even our deployment schedules. So we ground the program, Tony offered. No, Tom said. We build a trap. A fake schematic, designated Echo 9, was crafted. A plausible upgrade to the Raven's altitude compensation module, complete with embedded errors that would cause heat failure if implemented. They planted it into a restricted archive and waited. It took 4 days. A single access ping, at 2:14 a.m., from a technician named Raymond Velt. His clearance was level B, just high enough to make the access look like a mistake. But when agents searched his locker, they found coded notes in shorthand, a hollowed-out slide rule, and folded deep into a toolbox, a Soviet diplomatic pouch tag. Velt was arrested quietly, whisked away before sunrise. He never returned. Tom stood in the empty hallway outside the debrief room, staring at the locked door. He ate lunch with us, Tony said, furious. He played cards with the machinists. He helped calibrate the flight cameras. He sold us, Kate added, quieter. Margaret stepped beside Tom. We've tightened everything. There may still be watchers, but no more thieves. Harper's voice was cold. The Russians know what we're building. But thanks to Echo 9, what they don't know is that their copy is going to fail. Spectacularly. The trap worked. 6 months later, U.S. reconnaissance photographed wreckage in the Kazakh steppe, twisted titanium, a nose cone matching Raven's silhouette, and burned scars from a failed heat sink. Raven had flown first. And Raven had flown true. But Meridian would never be the same. They had caught the mole. But they had also learned a hard lesson. Some threats didn't come from the sky. They came from across the table. Chapter 10, The Legacy. The spring of 1958 brought strange silence to Meridian. The pace of production slowed, the lights in the underground test halls dimmed, and the CIA's presence grew more intermittent. Rumors swirled. Blackbird had achieved its goals. Raven had surpassed them. Perhaps, some whispered, the future was no longer engines, but orbits. Tom Brennan sat at his desk reviewing a thick file labeled Final Operational Summary, Blackbird/Raven. Inside were performance metrics, mission success rates, field reports from CIA handlers, and a final audit. 47 successful missions over denied airspace. Not a single aircraft lost. Raven had penetrated farther than any manned plane ever could. And now Washington wanted to close the chapter. "You've done your job, Mr. Brennan," said the suited official who delivered the file. "You've built the machine that made the next machine possible. It's time to hand off." The contract renewals never came. Kate Sullivan was offered a post at NASA. She left quietly, with a sealed crate of personal notebooks and a handwritten letter from Tom thanking her for engineering the impossible. Tony Torino joined a private defense startup in California, one that specialized in integrated missile guidance systems. He took with him only blueprints burned into memory and the lessons of silence. Colonel Harper was promoted to a new, undisclosed post. He sent Tom a final message via secure line. "If we meet again, it won't be on American soil. You built more than engines. You built trust." The last turbine rolled off the Meridian line on May 14th. Tom watched as the crane lifted it into a padded crate, bound for a base no one would name. Joe Torino passed away that summer. His hands, once blackened with metal dust, were folded peacefully across his chest at the funeral. Tom spoke at the service. He forged more than alloy. He forged a generation. Margaret retired soon after, leaving behind a vault of coded logs, security reports, and a sealed envelope labeled, "For when it happens again." In the fall, Tom walked the floor of the original Meridian plant, now dormant. Tools were covered in plastic. Drawings yellowed on clipboards. The hum of creation had been replaced by the hush of legacy. He paused before a photo on the wall, an early shot of the team in 1951. Young faces, wild ideas, and the weight of history not yet upon them. That night, he wrote a final entry in his personal journal. "We built machines that touched the edge of the sky. We lit fires hotter than stars. We outran missiles in silence. If no one remembers, let the engines speak for us." Then he closed the book and walked into the wind. Afterward, the Cold War was a race not only of weapons, but of ideas. Hidden in the folds of history are countless names and projects erased by time or secrecy. While the Blackbird Engines is a work of fiction, it draws inspiration from the real pioneers of aerospace. From the Skunk Works to the halls of MIT, from nameless labs in Pennsylvania to satellite briefings over Moscow. This story is dedicated to those who build in silence, who sacrifice recognition for results, and who understand that true progress often begins with impossible questions. May we always dare to fly higher. The author.